Hey guys, welcome to Dear Community Live. I'm here with a special guest, Ashley Mudd, who is a team leader for a project called The Longest Table that was funded in 2018. I believe $2,500?
No, 3,100.
3,100. You had a very specific budget, clearly. Yeah. All right, look, before we get kicked off, I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about the 24-Hour Citizen Project for our first-time listeners. So basically, the 24-Hour Citizen Project is an event where we connect people that have community-focused ideas with expertise and financial backers to make them happen. This is an event created for citizens to impact their community directly through the pursuit of citizen-led projects. So this has been a Dear Community Live that's been a long time coming, Ashley. I've been following you guys over the last year, I guess, and y'all have just been kicking butt. Thanks. And as I was prepping for this, just to put this into the perspective of the viewers, I've got almost a 20-page paper here that documents the perspectives that you guys have kind of been through over the last year. So like, it's even more fitting that you have this and we're doing a Dear Community Live, right? Because a Dear Community Live is all about how do we document the work that we've just done over the last year, right? How can other communities look at what you're doing and say, man, this is something that really needs to happen in my community. So anyway, glad you're here. Excited to hear your perspective and your experience about your project. So let's get things kicked off. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And then also give us like a 30, 45-second pitch about your project.
About the project. Yeah. So my name's Ashley. I am a member of a 3-person team. So Skyra Rito and Elsa Dimitriata sort of also help lead this project. We became friends over another project, which is kind of important to understand as part of this story. Skyra and I knew each other from previous work in the community on a leadership summit. She and I were having breakfast at Rusted Rooster. It's probably been about 3 or 4 years ago now, talking about the documentary The 13th and how we could showcase it in the community.
Wait, the documentary is called The 13th?
Yep, okay. The 13th. It's on Netflix. Okay. And so it's about the 13th Amendment. And Netflix decided that the film was so important that they were sort of releasing their rights for public showings. And so Skyra and I would have breakfast pretty regularly at Rusted Rooster over eggs and coffee, talking about changing the world. And I did not realize that she had a friend, Elsa, who had a theater in the community. So we had the perfect venue ready to go ahead and showcase the film. So really sort of our 3-person friendship began with the idea of that project, which is kind of interesting and important to know because most friendships usually begin on much lighter terms. But really, the 3 of us were brought together on that project, which sort of led into conversation starters, which was community initiatives to really bring the community together and have difficult conversations about race and to show the community that they weren't so difficult, which led us to pitching our project, The Longest Table. And so the idea was what could happen in a community like Lafayette if we came together and broke bread over a longer table. So instead of putting up walls and fences between us and our neighbors, what if we had a longer table? We brought us all together and we talked about really the current state of race relations in Lafayette. We suspected that it would be a difficult conversation, but that if we did it, really the benefits would really outweigh any of the obstacles we face to making it happen.
So tell me this, because I don't know the answer, and I know the viewers don't. What came first, conversation starters or The Longest Table?
Conversation starters was around for about 2 years before we got the idea for The Longest Table. So conversation starters first began, I am really obsessed sometimes with jumping in with data first. And so sometimes it takes Skyra and Elsa to push me to talk about, okay, but how do we really get some buy-in? So we began this project. Dr. Rick Swanson is a local historian and political science professor who did a project on our community and really the inclusive history of Lafayette and how we have to take into account when we brought slaves into this community and how our community grew because of that. It's often forgotten when we talk talk about the history of our community. And conversation starters began with Dr. Swanson's presentation. We hosted it at what was the Hive, and we thought we were going to get 20, 30 people. We had over 100. We ran out of theater seats, and we had to pull in folding chairs to make sure that everyone had a seat in the room. It was powerful. So sort of we thought we were setting the stage for a professor to come in and sort of give a lecture. It ended in a much more powerful evening than we could have ever imagined. There were a lot of tears. There were a lot of personal testimonies. People were really given their first opportunity to sort of stand up and share their stories, to maybe share that their experience growing up in Lafayette didn't quite match with the sort of shared narrative we have as a community. So it was a really powerful event. And that's really what it began with. We decided to call sort of the initiative Conversation Starters because we thought Dr. Swanson's session could start a conversation in the community. From there, we hosted the 13th and a variety of other community conversations over healthcare and access to healthcare, education and the disparity that's happening based on the zip code that you have in Lafayette Parish. So that happened for about 2 years before we started the conversation of turning it into something much bigger and deciding to pursue the 24-Hour Citizen Project.
So, well, it's interesting one, right? So you're bringing people to come and listen to someone like Dr. Swanson, who I've heard him talk before. It's an incredible story, and he pieces together relevant history. But what you found that night was that there are people that wanted to engage in the same narrative. So, and I assume that is kind of like some of the birth of this. So why do we want to start with a conversation? Why start with a conversation? Why is that important? And it's kind of like the backbone of this project. Yeah,
well, when you have a conversation with someone, there's some inherent need for you to put your guard down and be vulnerable. That sort of you are willing to, a good conversation. Sure. You're willing to engage. It's not a dialogue or a diatribe where I go on for 30 minutes and you're forced to sort of take it in. We knew that. I don't know if we understood exactly how powerful conversations that were going to happen after a lecture would be. We didn't realize that sort of it was going to open the gate for people to have conversations they weren't previously having. And I think that was really important for us, is that once people were given accurate information and they were given another lens to look through it, it really gave them permission to ask difficult questions and to have a deeper conversation than they were before. Than they were having before. It was almost like Dr. Swanson's presentation fueled them with information to have a deeper conversation than they would have before.
So let me get back to the details of your project.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about a long table, right? You talked about, I don't even know if you mentioned this, but it was downtown on Jefferson Street. And we'll get to some of those details later. And it was all about pairing people together to engage in a difficult conversation that they would have otherwise not had.
Yeah.
Right? But your project is much more than that. On the surface, that's what it was. And to be honest with you, whenever you applied for the 24-Hour Citizen Project, that's kind of what it was to me. So like, will you piece together all of the other moving parts for our listeners so they kind of have an understanding of, and I'm talking about the host dinners,
right? Sort of all the pieces.
Yes, put it all together.
Well, so logistically, that's the part that usually people think about. Wow, you had a dinner downtown, but I don't think they realize all that went into it, and that really it was months of work before that really gave any value to the event downtown. That was logistics.
That was the easy after party. Yeah, that was the
block
afterthought.
Party. If you know to throw a block party, you could have done that.
Sure.
What went into it, and I should back up to say, and I think we're going to talk some about the process though, is that when we first, I'm trying to remember, sort of we submitted our application, we had to answer questions, then we met with someone sort of leading up to the project. It really first began with the longest table. That was the crux of the project. Sort of everything that came beforehand kind of grew out of the process, which I know we'll jump into. But leading up to it, we sort of discovered that it can be intimidating if everyone's coming in their first time to the longest table and we're having the conversation. So how do we get people to that space, and how do we move them along sort of the spectrum? If we know that's where we want to be, let's sort of backtrack. We decided to have smaller dinners leading up to it because really, if you think about hosting a dinner, if you've ever hosted one or ever gone to one, they're pretty intimate. You invite people into your home. You spend a lot of time either cooking the meal or curating it and getting it from someone else. So you're thinking about your guests and how you can be hospitable and sort of break bread with them. We wanted to start there. And so we hosted over 20 individual dinners across the community. And so we invited people to come in and be host those dinners. So whenever we could, we partner them up together so that you weren't alone. And then each of those hosts went through a 2-evening training. And really that training was twofold. I believe a lot of our hosts came in thinking that we were going to train them on how to pick a menu and how to guide conversation. But what they also got was a deeper understanding of race relations in our community. What does it mean to be at the intersection of race and gender, and how does that impact you living in this community? So we really wanted to make sure that we were responsible with this and that we were equipping our hosts to go back and have the best dinner that they could, while also telling them that we gave them permission to make missteps along the way, because we made missteps along the way. Yeah. And if you sort of go in with this idea of perfection, you'll hold yourself to a higher standard and kind of get freaked out about doing it. So we wanted to make sure our hosts were comfortable.
We're talking about the conversation itself.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So the conversation sort of, how do you talk about race?
How do you do it?
How do you sort of, and really bigger than that, who do you invite to your dinner? And let's have a really transparent conversation over what your guest list looks like. Mm-hmm. And do you only have white friends? Do you only have Black friends? Is this the first time that you are inviting someone into your home that is a different race or ethnicity than you? Mm-hmm. And the answer for a lot of our hosts was yes. Mm-hmm. And it's something that you probably don't ever stop to think over. Who do I invite over for dinner? Who comes to my child's birthday parties? Mm-hmm. Who am I hanging out with on the weekends? But it's interesting because it's sort of very meta, but along the entire way of this, we were having these conversations to build up to the big conversation. But there are things that you don't tend to talk about because we believe they're going to be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, once you start talking about them, they're a lot more comfortable than you think. So at our training, we did small groups, and I was sitting with a group of women at my table, and we talked about that. What's it like to invite these people into your home that you've maybe never invited? And it's so multifaceted. So we talked about faith. What's it like if you're hosting one of these sessions at your church and your co-host is going to invite people of a different faith? How does that dynamic then look differently in your home? What does it look like if you're a biracial couple and you're both going out and you're reaching out to your friend group and you know that there's going to be some tensions that are happening at your table? What does it look like when you're planning your dinner and you might have someone with different cultures than you? How do you be sensitive to those different cultures when you're deciding what you're going to serve over your meal? So we did all of that. We went over all of that in our host training. My teammate Skyra did a really good job of also prepping our hosts to come into that training, because we knew there's only so much you can do in 2 evenings. Mm-hmm. So we built out a really comprehensive sort of email newsletter. And so it directed them to podcasts, to books, to articles, to Facebook pages, to Instagram pages that they could follow and really open their eyes to things in the community. We knew that was important because we had spent about 2 years building out conversation starters. So every time we got together and met, we were talking about these things. We were following these Facebook pages. We were following these Instagram memes and sort of having these conversations. Well, we had to sort of take a step back and understand that our come from was a little bit farther on the spectrum than some people's, and we couldn't take that for granted. We had to help people and give people whatever resources they wanted so they could be the best host that they could be, mm-hmm. and sort of have a next level conversation with their guest.
And do you think you were successful after the training where they left and they felt completely comfortable?
So I would push back to say that they felt completely comfortable, because if that was our goal, no. I think but part of this process, for Ashley personally, was to stop chasing comfort. Yeah. So I tend to approach projects with sort of, how can we get in this place where everyone's comfortable, everyone's happy? I had to let go of that really early in the project. And I think that maybe it was important that I was a part of this team and that was my come from, because learning that to sort of sit in that discomfort helped change the way we look at the project. And we were honest with our host. We don't know what's going to happen at your dinner. There could be something that triggers one of your guests that derails the conversation. So it's allowing you to understand that there's no such thing as a safe space, but how can we make it safer? Mm-hmm. And how can we equip you with the right materials, the right resources that you can call upon so that you can at least push through that type of conversation. And that, our dinners were, as much as it could be, sort of a sterile place. You're inviting everyone and they know what they're going to talk about. But that's really just a tool to make you more comfortable to have these conversations at your dinner table with your family, for Thanksgiving when you go home and you have a racist uncle that you're going to have this conversation with, in your workroom when you are having a lunch break and someone says something and you're the one that needs to jump in and sort of correct it. We knew that those conversations were going to happen without the comfort of the model that we created. So we wanted our host to be prepared to always be able to step in and have those conversations.
And I derailed the whole picture that you're trying to paint
it's no problem.
little bit. I'm sorry. So we talked about the longest table. We talked about the dinners, the catalyst dinners, as you call them, right? Mm-hmm. Beforehand, there were somewhere around 25, I believe. 25. And then you sent this big invite to everyone that was involved and to the public and said, hey, we've got this block party on Jefferson Street. We want to come and talk about the results of the dinner and engage in conversation, right? Yep. Okay, good.
Yeah, so that was an interesting undertaking. So for those of you familiar with Lafayette, we closed down Jefferson Street from the intersection of where the Pearl is down to Dat Dog and Rev, which was really exciting. There's a lot of work that goes into closing down a street. Mm-hmm. It's something that I, on the front end, wasn't excited that it was my task, but on the back end, learned a lot about community organizing and the importance of telling your story. Yeah. So you have to go to each business and explain to them why you're going to shut down the street, why there's going to be a police presence on both ends, why the intersections will be closed, and why their customers won't have access to these parking spots on a Sunday afternoon. But what surprised me was that it gave me an opportunity to tell them our vision for the community, why we were doing this event, and every single business owner was excited to sign our permit. And so it was really sort of an exciting experience for me to go through that and to share our story and to realize that more people were bought into it than I first imagined. So, we did a lot of work on the front end. We were really excited to get Zadie's Catering to serve our meal. We did red beans and rice. What a fitting meal. And then we encouraged all of our guests to bring their own bowls from home. So bring something from home. It's sort of exciting event to share with each other. We set up shop on the street. We literally set up the longest table. We had help from our Parks and Rec department who donated our tables and chairs, started stacking tables as we could, and we ended up having over 300 people join us that afternoon. Wow. To break bread with each other.
Wow. That's great, Ashley. So take us back a little bit to the decision to apply for the 24-Hour Citizen Project. Why? I mean, look, when I look at you and Skyra and Elsa, clearly a capable team. Why do you need a springboard like the 24-Hour Citizen Project to help get funds or get the word out?
So the easy answer is money. Sort of you go through this project, you end it with money. But I think that the more reflective answer is the legitimacy that it gives to a project. This is a rigorous process, and I think that there were points in time where we all got frustrated with, hey, we've been doing this for 2 years. This is a lot of hoops to jump through. But the reality is it gives your project a lot of legitimacy. It gets you in front of people in the community that you might not otherwise get in front of. And I don't say that lightly. The three of us have careers that put us in front of community leaders, funders all the time, but in a very different aspect than this project. And so we had that access, but even still, there were sometimes we would have conversation starters events where we couldn't get the people in the room that we wanted. And that's just the reality that when we're talking about race and we're talking about the state of race relations in our community, sometimes the pull that we have goes out of the window. And so I really saw the 24-Hour Citizen Project as a way to give some weight behind the project that we were doing. This is the part where I have to admit, when we decide to apply, I never thought we were going to get selected. Mm-hmm. So I was surprised when we made it past the first round of being able to pitch. And then the night that we went up there, success for me wasn't really even getting money. I never thought that we were going to get money. Success for me was getting our story out there, sharing it with a community in a different light, sharing it with a different audience than we had previously been in front of before. That was going to be success. So when we found out that not only did we get funded to our full ask, that it was above and beyond what the backers had originally agreed to give that night, it shocking, yes, but also a real sense of validation that not only is what we not only is this project important to the community, but it's important enough for people to put their own money above and beyond what they already said they were going to do to back it. And it sort of was, I think, the validation that we needed at a time where some of our programs were getting less attended to sort of catapult it into what it's become today.
Yeah. I remember during the event, and this is always my favorite part, right? At the end, whenever you've got all the projects lined up and you've got the checks in your hand and you're announcing the winners.
Yeah.
You guys came up, you accepted the check, and we're doing this picture, and I remember standing behind the camera and I see tears. Is there a personal component to this project that really pulls at your heart?
Yeah, well, you had said something, before we started, something about tears, and I was like, I'm not an emotional person or a crier at all. And I think that part of it was just complete awe, that the community came behind it and did it. I think that, on a personal level, we had worked a lot before that night trying to push this project in the community. And there were people sort of close to us. Each of us, we have our own story that just didn't see the value in conversation starters. So this is pre-longest table.
Sure.
The work that we did with Dr. Swanson on healthcare, education, those types of things. There were some people who just didn't see the value in it. And I think that sometimes we would get sort of a pat on the shoulder, like, this is really cute, that you're doing, that you're doing. And I think that for me personally, that's the one thing that I always hate, is that my work is cute to people. We're doing it for a reason. And during the process, we grew a lot. My advice for anyone going through this process is trust it. And if someone tears apart your idea, listen to them. Doesn't mean that your idea is bad. Doesn't mean that you need to tear it apart, but listen to the things that they're finding in it. Because what happened is it made us so much stronger in being able to articulate our vision and to really move it from what people thought is cute is to the sort of community organized initiative that was going to change Lafayette. And so I think that there was a lot of reason that sort of, there were tears. There was a lot of personal growth for me individually. I think that there was growth for us as a group. And I think there's just sort of validation that our community was bought into this idea that we can grow and heal together, that we can do this as a community. I think that anyone who is younger in this community often finds themselves having the conversation over, is Lafayette for me? There's a variety of things that will happen in our community. Something that we're excited about loses funding, a nonprofit that we support is struggling, an elected official says something that we don't agree with. And it's really easy to sit back and get frustrated with it. But this for us was a personal investment into making the community better. This was above and beyond what we're doing at work, above and beyond what we do with our family. I'll tell you, there's a lot of nights away from my wife where I'm pretty sure she was frustrated, like, God, are you doing this again? So I think part of the emotion on that night was just that we were going to make a difference. It wasn't just the three of us hanging out at a coffee shop trying to figure out how to make Lafayette. Everyone was bought in. I don't know. There were at least 100 people in the room that night, backers of private business. So sort of everyone's willing to sort of to pitch in and get behind that project. I don't know if I could ever really articulate what that feels like.
Yeah, and I remember in the backer huddle, the backers were sold. I mean, they knew that this was something. And I think that your challenge going into that night, and maybe still as we talk about steps forward, but is that, okay, how do we convert what you say is like this cute idea, or, this idea where we say, like, the first step is engaging in conversations. And in conversation is a step forward, right? How do we convert that to real change? And I think that's what you guys did a good job at selling them on that night. And I think that's part of the reason why you guys got funding. All right. So I painted the picture of you guys holding a check. It was a great emotional moment.
I still have the check.
It's
in my living room. Yeah.
We should have brought it today. But now what? There's always that moment where it's like, okay, we're going to put all this time and energy and prep into selling what this idea is and painting a perfect picture for backers. But then all of a sudden you wake up the next morning, you have to go to work.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? What's like the first things to get an idea off the ground? What did that look like for you? So
the second that I walked off the stage, we started working. What surprised me was the amount of people who stopped me and said, I want to be a dinner host. So this was sort of before we even knew we had the money. I walked off the stage knowing, regardless of what happens, we are going to find the money to do this because people want to be host. And so I got home that night and sort of I had on jeans, and in my back pocket I had a bunch of business cards of people who had stopped me and said, I want to be a host. And so that was sort of exciting to know, no matter if we get money or not, we're doing this. We met pretty quickly after that to start talking about how do we scale this and make this happen? Because our original sort of application was just the one dinner of everyone coming together. It was through the process with our coach, and then really sort of the 24-hour scramble that we added in the host training, the individual dinners, and really reaching out into the community in a much larger grassroots space. I think our first step was sitting down and going through what would our hosts look like, and sort of how do we go out and make sure that we're not just bringing our friends who have already been participating to the table to be hosts, that we're not really doing justice to the community, and we're not really being good stewards of the money that we won if we're just going back to the people who've already been engaged. So how do we reach out and make sure that we're really getting a good cross-section of hosts to the table? Then we spent a lot of time talking about what would the host training look like and what did people need. What I'm really proud of the team for doing is turning outward and figuring out what needed to go into that training, because I think we had an idea of what we wanted to present, but we really need to know what our community needed. And that the host training in and of itself was a huge success for the community, because we trained 50 different people to go out and move through the world differently. So even if we had just would have stopped after the host training, we knew that we moved the needle in our community. So we turned outward and we asked a lot of questions. What do you need to know? What scares you about having difficult conversations? What do you know and what do you not know about race relations, about the state of our community and how we're moving forward? Have you engaged in a project like this before? So really building out our host training and determining what those pieces look like. And so we got, last year was in August, was the pitch night was in August. Yep. We hosted our longest table event the following February. That took up a good chunk of our time. And so the event itself, sort of closing the street, getting those things together, figuring that piece out. So simultaneously, while we were building out our host training, sort of a training packet, making sure our hosts would be comfortable, we were also figuring out what does this big event look like. And it evolved several times, figuring out how do you bring the community together in a celebration. We know that our individual dinners can be difficult, and that we didn't quite know where those were going to go, sort of direction each would go in, but that our biggest event was going to be a celebration for all the work that went into, and to celebrate our host and to make sure that we're opening it up to the community at large, so we could all come to sort of celebrate how we moved forward. A key piece I think that we did early on, and this really was birthed from the sort of that 24-hour scramble, was bringing in a researcher. And that sort of exactly what you said earlier, how do you move from a conversation to action? Sort of how do we mobilize Lafayette to be different because we had this project? We are incredibly fortunate, and I don't know sometimes if we give her enough credit, but Dr. Danielle Fastring joined us really early in on the project, and it was important to bring her in early because we wanted to vet our materials by her, our trainings by her, what our surveys look like, how would we recruit people in the community to make sure that it's the right sample for the survey and the documentation that she was going to do. So she came in really early to sort of join our team and to help us make sure that everything we were building was with the big picture in mind, and that everything was leading to, and we didn't know what it would look like, but the report, so we knew that was going to be sort of an end goal for us. That was sort of our accountability to the 24-hour Citizen Project. Sure. Sort of that was, all of these things that we're doing, we know how it's moving the needle, but we wanted something tangible to go back to the community and say, Lafayette is now different because you believed in us, you gave us this money, and you all went through this program with us.
You mentioned something interesting about one of your first steps, and that was identifying who our hosts would be. Yeah. And then what is the audience that we want to engage in? Yeah. And I think that's important because a project like this could easily attract the same 10 people that do everything, right? The same people that care. So how did you, I'm sure that there was some conversation around that. Like, how do we avoid the echo chamber?
So we ended up doing applications for hosts, and we spent a lot of time talking about that because when you do an application process, there is some inherent exclusivity in that. And how can we sort of lead this inclusion work if we know out of the gate we're going to do something that can be considered exclusive? We ultimately decided it was the best way to prevent a bunch of people who were already doing this work, who were already showing up for the same projects in the community. We really needed to understand the right makeup of what our host would be. And so we did an application process, and we asked people, why are you coming to the table? Why do you want to be a part of this? And in part of that, we did have to go back and have conversations with some of our friends, some of the people we knew in the community who are your typical players, the people who are at every volunteer event, who are doing all of these things. And we had to go back and say, there are a lot of people already in your circle considering this. We really think it's best if only one of you serves as a host and we're able to offer this spot to other people, which, going back to that sort of that meta, it's all about conversations. We were forced to have some conversations, in the community with some people that might have been difficult, but in the end, we think it was the right thing to do. It also allowed us to really make space for people we had never met. And that's what excited me the most about our host trainings was that for both sessions that we hosted, there were people in the room I had never met or seen before. We sort of, would look up and we didn't even have mutual friends with them on Facebook, like really new people that were coming to the table. And that's what it was about, because we can talk about this in our circle every single day and never move the needle. And then really what happens is that we don't even move the needle for ourselves if we're not bringing in other people. We don't understand where our missteps are and where we aren't quite moving as far as we can go. So we had to really open up our eyes to see who all can benefit from this opportunity and make sure that we're not just sort of in our silo pulling the same people in over and over.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? In thinking back towards the longest table event on Jefferson Street, I think you guys did a great job of that. I mean, you say, I remember, we've got friends that hang out and function here, all over the community. And I remember seeing a really good mix of people. So, and I know that was one of the challenges that you guys had to take on, especially from the backers. I think I remember one of the backers actually specifically asking that question. All right. So we talked a lot about your project.
Yep.
We talked about details of your project that you love and why it's important to you. What are like some of the things that you didn't expect?
Yeah, so I definitely don't know if I started very open to the 24-hour decision project process. I don't know if I realized sort of all that was going to go through it. And I think that when you tend to do work like this for a while, there's some vanity that creeps in. You think that I've got this figured out. I'm doing this community organizing anyway. And I definitely think that happened some sort of as we were going through the process and holes were being poked into the project. In hindsight, I realized how important that piece was. So for anyone who's not familiar with it, you sort of the night before, you sit at a table and you just have people rotating out. And it felt like, I'm sure there was much longer than this, but it felt like every 2 minutes, someone else was sort of sitting in front of us and asking a question. And it's really difficult to sort of sit through, I think, any idea. But I think that more of our ideas should go through that sort of like very rapid sort of experimentation. You have to keep thinking it through and talking it through. Well, if then what happens? If this happens, how are you going to respond to this? Because it makes you think through a lot of things very rapidly that you're able to sort of reiterate and sort of build into the process really quickly. I didn't expect enjoying that sort of on the back end of it because it seemed so intimidating sort of on the front end. But it wouldn't have gotten us to this place where we did the host trainings and we did the individual dinner. So really sort of grateful that it forces you to get uncomfortable and to really think on a much deeper level on what you're doing. And then to be totally honest, the pitch itself really got me outside of my comfort zone. Just sort of being on the stage, I kept getting freaked out about the time limit and going over. So trivial.
So you only get 3 minutes, just so people know.
Right, 3 minutes. And so that seems like, a reasonable time, but when you really start talking and sort of every time I practiced, I went over.
Sure.
And so in my mind, I imagine someone just sort of like, putting the hook out and pulling me off stage. And so if you think of like the mountains we moved to make this project happen, that's what freaked me out. It was of all the things.
It's the piece that I would have never imagined.
Right. Because I do public speaking, but just sort of this is different. That sort of like you have this room full of people, you're doing this pitch and it's really vulnerable, to be up there. You don't know what the questions you're going to ask are. So that part really challenged me personally to just sort of get up there and really get comfortable enough with the project that no matter what question I got, I was ready to just sort of to roll with it.
Pretend for a second that you have another community listening to you right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell me or tell them what kinds of hurdles they might anticipate if they were going to do something similar to the longest table or engage in a conversation starter type concept.
I think one of the things I felt to mention this far was sort of the behind the scenes work that we did, reaching out to individuals, sort of prepping them that we were going to do this project. I think that when you want to have a large scale community conversation about race, that it's going to make some people uncomfortable. I would be naive to tell you that there's not people in the community who aren't happy that we did this project, and there's not people who think that we shouldn't have done it and that we're just race baiting. Like, that's the reality. They may have not said it to me in my face, but I know that someone out there believes that. And so I'm certain that there's going to be someone in your community with the same perspective. And so I think that you have to decide whose voice you're going to listen to, and how you're going to do the work anyway. I also think that it really comes down to how you pitch it. I think that what helped us going through this process and having those people ask us over and over is that we really were in a safe space. They're sort of badgering and asking us questions because they believed in the project and they wanted us to get to the best place. And so I can't recommend doing that enough. It's getting someone you trust, have them ask you the hard questions over and over and over until you can answer them like that. Because that's exactly what I experienced when I had to go get people to sign the permit to close Jefferson Street. They were asking those same questions. Well, I had spent months of answering them over and over again. And really, how comfortable you are with your content, how comfortable you are telling your vision is going to make a difference. I think that if you approach it from this place of optimism and positivity, and you're doing it because you believe that your community will move farther along the spectrum and your community will be in a better place, and that your goal is to improve the community, that it makes it so much easier to overcome sort of those naysayers who are going to challenge you and challenge whether or not it's needed in your community, because you're doing it for the right reasons. You're doing it to make your community better.
Sure. So tell everybody a little bit about some of the resources that you guys have kind of developed that you'd be willing to share, right? So like the obvious one is the conversation starters pathway to dialogue document, right? Any other stuff that are out there that people can, like, what about the training materials that you guys use to train the hosts? Is that something that we'll be able to put public on the website or no?
Well, so not the training materials. Okay. And part of that is sort of, they don't exist in a vacuum. So the training materials are part of a bigger process. But there's absolutely an opportunity to help a community if they want to figure out how to bring this to their community. And I think that the training materials are one sort of place to start. I would recommend starting with that document and sort of reading the research. So we did very extensive pre and post surveys, and all of that data is public to understand really what is the pulse of our community and what is it that we can be doing better. I believe that document is invaluable in guiding future conversations. And I think equipping anyone who wants to have a conversation on how we move our community forward, this is sort of a roadmap to go back and understand where people are in our community. If someone is interested sort of in figuring out how to scale this, to reach out to Elsa, Skyra, or I to talk about what went into the trainings, what that looked like, how we went ahead and built the programming out, and to also understand, to scale it into a community, to understand that this is going to look different in every single community. We felt empowered to do this because we had Dr. Swanson's information to understand sort of what Lafayette's come from was, and we understood sort of how to build it out for this specific community.
Yeah. So tell me this, if we don't have like template training materials that we could provide, where did we begin in terms of like collecting information to share with some of the hosts? Are there other resources out there that don't belong to us that maybe other communities can tap into, or no?
Oh yeah, so our email newsletter list and sort of the resources that we have been steadily curating in there. One of the resources that I can't believe I failed to mention that the team worked on was a list of minority-owned businesses in the community to make sure that we were frequenting those businesses, and we talked about sort of the value of where you spend your dollar and what are we doing to sort of lift up different businesses in the Lafayette community is something that we do have available. I would check out the Conversation Starters Facebook page to see the variety of resources that we have pushed out the Netflix series that we have recommended that people watch, the podcast that we have recommended people listen to, the other pages that we recommend people follow, that sort of this work is not a one and done. So this isn't something that you sort of grab the book off of your bookshelf, you read it, you put it back, and you move on with your life. It's sort of a lifelong commitment to moving the needle for you personally and the community that you live in. So we would encourage anyone who is thinking about doing this type of thing in their community, scaling it across Acadiana, whatever it is that you are interested in, is to figure out sort of what personal commitment will you do for sort of continued personal education, so that whenever you find yourself in that situation to have a difficult conversation, you feel empowered to do so from a place of knowledge.
Sure. And just so that everybody's clear, the document I'm referring to is called Conversation Starters, Pathways to Dialogue. And it's the perspective on race in Lafayette, Louisiana, and moving a community from concern to active. And so we'll post this on the 24hourcitizenproject.com website under the longest table project so people can see it.
And what's great too is that document does go through sort of our method and our process, and that you really could read that and figure out how you go and scale that for your community.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you guys for doing this. You know what I would love to really do is every project that comes through the 24-Hour Citizen Project would do something like this. But it seems like a big ask.
Yeah, well, and I think that for us, the reason why it was such a vital part of this project was to show that we can move from concern to active. That this, it was almost sort of like our validation to the community on the work that we did.
Sure, absolutely. I get it. Okay, so we've done all this work and over a year has passed. Now what? How does this project kind of continue to live on in the community, and what does that look like?
So one of the things that happened at each of the dinners was sort of a wrap up around that question. Do you know, sort of what are you going to do differently? And we know that that's different for every person. Do you know, that might just be going home and talking to your children differently about race. And if that's how you move the needle in your life and in Lafayette, then that's what we want you to do.
Sure.
But we know for others, they really want to be a part of the movement and they want to be a part of the change. So, you know, in this document, there are a variety of ways that you can get involved right now. And if you head to the Conversation Starters Facebook page, there's actually a Google Doc that you can sort of go type in your information, pick the specific project that you want to be involved in. And really, we want people to be involved. I think there's 3 things that I really want to highlight that are sort of kicking off right now that are direct projects from this. So they started because of this. One of them is the Liberation Bound White Allies, and that's being led by my project partner, Elsa Demetriadis. And it's a space for people. Oh, yeah, I had some notes on here.
Oh, you have some notes?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Good. I'm just
but so
sure.
it's a space for white allies to come together and to hold each other accountable for the work that that's expected of people who, you know, move through this world with white privilege. And how can we move the needle for people that don't walk into rooms with the same privilege as us? And it's a way to hold each other accountable for the work that we are doing in the community. Sort of the sister project to that, led by my other teammate, Sky Rito, is Black Unfiltered. And it's a safe space for Black and brown people in the community to come together and talk about what it's like to move through Lafayette as a person of color. And, you know, those spaces are intentionally designed the way that they are around conversation. So sort of keeping that theme of the safer place to come and have conversation, but also this way to hold each other accountable to talk about the work that we're doing and how we're going to move the needle forward. The other project that I am really excited that is currently in production, but will launch in February in honor of Black History Month in partnership with the ACA, is the Voices of Race in Portrait. So the team has been working to gather a variety of storytellers, facilitators, photographers with a variety of different styles and different subjects in the community. And so what's going to happen is that a subject will be paired with a photographer and with a storyteller. And the photographer will sort of, based on whatever their style of photography is, do a series of photos of the subject while the storyteller collects their story on their experience with race in the Acadiana community.
Wow.
Yeah, and so this will be on display at the ACA next February, in February 2020. So you'll be able to come in and see the portraits and read the story of each of the subjects that participated in the project.
Wow. That's going to be pretty powerful, I think.
I think that it's going to be powerful. And, you know, what's interesting about it is I'm interested to see, you know, there's a conversation that happens to sort of create the photography and to create the story. But then when you go as a viewer, you're sort of put into this space where you're going to see these images and you're going to read these stories, and you're really just going to have to, consume it and reflect. You won't have that sort of that interaction. And I think that, we can sometimes do more of that is giving people of color sort of a platform to share their story unapologetically, whatever that means to them. And that sort of, it's not, their job to justify their story to us.
Great. So how do people find out about these projects? So it's on the Conversation Starters website?
Facebook page. Yep. Conversation Starters Facebook page.
Okay.
And on there's a Google form for anybody who wants to sign up. I only mentioned 3 of the long list of sort of next steps that are in the document, but they're all listed on there. And you can stay engaged by picking the ones that you are interested in, and then you'll get information specifically for those that you want to stay connected to. Because in addition to that, there's been group talks about series, television series, about books, about podcasts, continuing that conversation and figuring out how do you turn that into action. Sort of now that you are educated, this, what will you do differently because of it?
So let's put the longest table on a shelf for now.
Okay.
I want to pivot a little bit into just community activism, because I think it's not every day that I get to sit across from somebody like Ashley Mudd, who is engaged in so many things in the community. And so like my question to you, and look, it could be about the longest table too, but like why? Like why not sit back on your heels and watch other people do the work? Why do you kind of take that responsibility, onto yourself?
I think that fundamentally we're responsible for the community that we live in. I think that it's really easy to talk about the things that we don't love about insert the name of your community. And it's pretty contagious to sort of get in that loop of the things that you don't like. It's easy to sort of go grab a beer and talk about the pothole that you drove over to get there, and you're upset with, your council person. I think the harder work, but the work that we need to be doing is sort of finding the piece that we have ownership of and that we can change. For me personally, there are a lot of things that I love about Lafayette that keep me here, but there are a lot of things that really get under my skin and frustrate me. And I think that I have, I have a few options. I can move to a different city that might sort of on the surface align with what I would hope the community I live in does. But sort of doing that with guilt, knowing there's a lot of people who don't have the ability to do that. That sort of Lafayette will always be their home. And so it's sort of like, as long as I'm here, what can I do that makes this community a better place? I have a very unique, job that allows me to meet new people literally daily, sort of, and understand what their come from is, why they love Lafayette, why they don't love Lafayette, why they're here, why they're on their way out, why they're moving to Boulder or Orlando or Houston. And it gives me this vantage point to see that we really do have more power over our community than we admit. I think of all the things that I've been involved in Lafayette, the majority of them have been grassroots movements, and they have changed the community. Being a part of a group that literally changed our community's constitution, being a part of a group that brought to the forefront conversations about race when it wasn't happening. These are people all about the same age as me, getting together, deciding that when we look in the mirror of Lafayette, it's not the Lafayette we want, but that when we stop complaining and we start doing, we're able to make a difference. And I just think that's powerful. Do you know that you can make a difference? And sort of it's I think it's intoxicating once you do it. You want to keep doing it. You want to sort of keep changing this community for what it can be. To talk specifically about this work and why it became so important to me and showing the 13th. I did not think I was going to cry, but I have very important young Black men in my life that are a part of my family, my cousins and my godson. And I remember going to my aunt's house one night for dinner. I did not expect this. And talking about her conversation with him about how he moves through the world and if he ever gets pulled over in a car and what he should do when a cop approaches the car. And he shared a story with me about he and some friends were at a gas station one night, And the cops were called on them because they were too rowdy in the parking lot. And, you know, the cops came and they were very friendly, and they talked to them about how you're making some patrons of the store uncomfortable, and we would rather if you didn't hang out in the parking lot. And that's a successful story on how that ended. There's a lot of young Black men in this country where their story doesn't end that way. And how sad is it that we live in a world where we have to tell our young Black youth how loud they're able to speak, when they're able to speak, how fast they can drive their car, that they don't get the privilege of letting a taillight burn out and driving around on it for a couple of months. They have to move through this world so incredibly differently than some of our other youth. It's heartbreaking. And so if I know that I can move the needle on so many other things in the community, that if I also have this voice, that I am not serving this community if I'm not using that voice to make this community safer for our youth. And the reality is it won't be safer until we're willing to have hard conversations about the things that are making it the way that it is.
One, thank you for sharing your story, but you point to something that's really important that I wish would echo for miles and miles from this building, and that is, this is a place that can be changed. This is a place that can be changed, modified for whatever way that you want that is right.
Yep.
And I think, sure, you or I or Mark or whoever could move to another city that is more maybe aligned, with some of the things that we want, whether that be something like conversation starters or some amenities that maybe Lafayette doesn't have, right? It's not beautiful on every front, but it's a place where you can live, and if you're so compelled, you can change the spaces around you. And I think that's what I see in you. That's what I see in this project. And I think that it fits really nicely with the 24-Hour Citizen Project and all the other projects that are involved. So, man, Ashley, thank you. Thank you so much for coming, for sharing details about your project, for giving us a little bit of your heart. I think that this is a project that is going to not just make an impact for a year, but I think it's going to continue to live on. And so we're really grateful for that. Thanks for participating in the 24-Hour Citizen Project.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for funding us.
Of course. There's backers out there that have been thanked, but I mean, they're just like the projects. The backers are the backbone behind what we do. Without them, we wouldn't be able to to have a 24-Hour Citizen Project, really. Yeah. Is there any other details that we didn't talk about that you wanted to share?
No, I think that we pretty much covered it. I am, my advice to anyone listening to this would be, whatever your project, similar to this or not, is just go out and try. I think that even if you fail, that you become different on the other end of it, and your community is different for you trying, and that you don't have to just inherit the community that's given to you. I think that sort of it's our responsibility to go out and change it into the community that we want it to be. Great.
Guys, Ashley Mudd with Team Longest Table, funded in 2018 for $3,100. Thank you. And we'll be in touch with the next project.